Okay, so everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. As you know, today's conference is all about my country, Scotland. Okay, we are going to talk about the history, the culture, and the traditions of Scotland. This conference is suitable for anyone B1 level, B2, round about there. Okay. The presentation will be in English. There will be some French translations here and there, but predominantly in English. If I could ask everyone just to confirm their level here in the chat box. You can write, B1, B2, A2, whatever it might be. And if I need to adapt any of the language, I can do that. Okay. So thank you so much. So let's begin, shall we? As I mentioned before, I will be talking about the history, the culture, and the traditions of my beautiful country, Scotland. Okay. Just out of curiosity, has anyone visited Scotland? If so, thumbs up, or thumbs down, or... I see a no, I see a thumbs down. Not yet. That's a very good answer, Christine. I like that one. Very good. Well, maybe after today, you will be tempted to go at some point. All right. So there will be, I'll be using some of this vocabulary today. Okay. We have words like border, landscapes, valleys, rugged terrain, lochs, which is a Scottish word, means lake. Okay, loch. Flat terrain, patron saint, and crucified. Okay, so let's take a look here. Now, for those that don't know, Scotland is a country that is part of the United Kingdom, and you will find it in the northern part of the main island, just above England. We can see the capital city over here, Edinburgh. Not Edinburgh, as many people pronounce, Edinburgh. And then we have my city over here, Glasgow. Scotland shares a border with England to the south and is surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean to the west and north, the North Sea to the northeast, and the Irish Sea to the south. Geographically, Scotland is known for its diverse landscapes, including mountains, valleys, and coastal areas. You can see some lovely pictures here. The Isle of Skye in the middle, personal favourite of mine. Over here, we have the Eilean Donan Castle, which you will find in the Highlands of Scotland. I should say, by the way, if anybody has any questions, I should have said this earlier, if anyone has any questions, feel free to write in the chat box and I will address them as soon as I can. Okay. Now, the Highlands, as I just mentioned, is in the north and the west of Scotland, and they are characterised by the rugged terrain and the numerous lochs, while the lowlands in the south and east are categorized by their relatively flat terrain. Okay. Now, in Scotland, we don't tend to use the word lake that much. We tend to say loch. Okay. So you just kind of got that sound at the end, which is unusual in English. You don't really hear that at all, but in Scotland, we say it. Okay. Loch. A little history lesson for everyone. Some vocabulary first. Hunters, gatherers. We have the translations over here. Claim. Ownership. Tools. Weapons. Timber. And withdrawal. Say that last one again. Withdrawal. Now, some other words here. Feel free to note any of these down as well, of course. So we have raiding, Nordic, struggles, lead to, led to, the past tense there, overwhelming support, and legal framework. Prehistory, 12,000 to 4,000 BC. Now, in 12,000 BC, people first occupied Scotland in the Paleolithic era. You can see some lovely artwork, what it might have looked like all those years ago. And around 4000 BC, people started cultivating and claiming ownership of the land in the Neolithic period. So it's safe to say that Scotland has a very extensive history, shall we say, tens of thousands of years. In 2500 BC, the arrival of metalworking was the start of the Bronze Age. And before recorded history, in 1000 BC, Scotland was home to Celtic tribes. Okay, now the pronunciation there is Celtic tribes, not Celtic, Celtic tribes. These early inhabitants left behind archaeological evidence such as stone, tools, and structures indicating their presence. For example, the stone circles at Callanace on the Isle of Lewis. You might see this word a few times today, isle. Okay, it basically means island. Okay, isle. Some of you may recognize this as something similar to Stonehenge as well in England. We have our very own version in Scotland. Okay, the stone circles at Callanace. Enter the Romans. Scotland's recorded history began with the arrival of the Romans. Emperor Claudius invaded Britain in 43 AD, and he soon ventured north. However, the Romans attempted to conquer Scotland, but they were unsuccessful. I like to tell that story. It makes me proud as a Scottish person. But anyway, so the Romans were unsuccessful. So what happened? They built a border between the Roman Empire and Scotland, and this became known as Hadrian's Wall. And part of this wall you can still see today in Scotland. It's a very popular tourist attraction. The wall itself, it was built in the early 2nd century AD to protect the northern frontier from the Celtic tribes. Now, following the Roman withdrawal in the mid-80s AD, Scotland was characterised by the presence of distinct Celtic kingdoms. We had Pictavia and Daldriada as well. We'll see them a little bit later in the lesson as well. But yes, we had two distinct Celtic kingdoms present in Scotland. Okay, one was in the north, one was in the southern lands. Now, from the late 8th century onwards, Vikings from Scandinavia began raiding the coastal areas of Scotland. Eventually, some Vikings established permanent settlements, contributing to the joining of Nordic and Celtic cultures in certain regions. This also had a great influence on the language as well in Scotland at the time. Gaelic, and later on had actually an influence on English as well. Now, in the 9th century, unification happened. Okay, a man named Kenneth MacAlpin, very Scottish name, emerged as a key figure by uniting the kingdoms of Pictavia and Daldriada. This marked the foundation of what would later be the Kingdom of Scotland. Now, a fun fact for everyone, MAC, in names like this, you've probably heard of McDonald's or something like that. Mac translates as son of. Okay, son of Alpin, Mac Alpin. And this here is the old Scottish flag. It's sometimes in Scotland you will see this flag today. It's not our official flag anymore, but this was the official flag of Scotland for a long time down here. The War of Independence. Now, I'm sure some of you may have seen the film Braveheart before with Mel Gibson. You can see some heads moving. So, just to be clear, Braveheart is not 100% true of a story, but it's quite close, I guess. So, what happened? England successfully invaded Scotland in 1296. And the early 14th century saw intense struggles for Scottish independence. In the picture on the left here, we can see William Wallace. He looks nothing like Mel Gibson here. He was a Scottish warrior and leader, and he led the resistance against the English rule from 1297 to 1298. Along with the support of the Guardian of Scots, his name was Robert the Bruce. You might remember him from the film as well. And he later became king in 1306. Many critical moments were in the Battle of Bannockburn. Very famous, I guess, date and event that occurred in Scottish history. Led the way to Scottish independence as well. Now, later on, 1603, a few hundred years later, we had James VI of Scotland. He ascended to the English throne as James I in 1603 and uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. Now, what did this mean? It did not immediately lead to political integration, but the countries were united. All right. In 1707, the Acts of Union merged the Parliaments of England and Scotland, thus creating the Kingdom of Great Britain as what we know today. Great Britain or the United Kingdom. While this formalised political union took place, Scotland retained its distinct legal and religious institutions. So there were some separate laws that Scotland had in comparison with England, but they were recognised as one union. Modern developments, fast forward to the 20th century. In the latter part, or the later part of the 20th century, there was a growing demand in Scotland for greater autonomy over domestic affairs. In other words, Scotland wanted to make its own decisions about the law, social rights, etc. This desire for self-governance led to the concept of what we call devolution. What does this mean? Devolution, it allows for the delegation of certain powers from the UK Parliament to the other countries within the United Kingdom. So to Scotland, to Wales, and to Northern Ireland. You can see a little protest over here as well. In 1997, we have what's called the devolution of power. Okay, so what happened was there was a referendum in Scotland which resulted in overwhelming support for the establishment of a devolved Scottish Parliament. we still have this government today. The following year, the Scotland Act 1998 was published, creating the legal framework for devolution, meaning that Scotland could make its own decisions about certain things within the law. As we can see here, there are some people who want to leave the United Kingdom here in the Union. Okay. Now, the Scottish Parliament, which is in the capital city of Edinburgh, was given powers over policy areas. This includes things like education, health, justice, and transport. Whereas reserved matters such as defence, foreign affairs, and even tax as well remain under the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom Parliament. Let's talk about the culture. History lesson to one side, and politics to one side. So, Scotland has a rich linguistic history. There are 4 national languages in Scotland that are recognised. The first one is English. The second is Scots. The third is Gaelic. And the fourth, which is recognised as a national language, British Sign Language for deaf people. Okay. Now, Scots language, not sure if everyone's aware of this, Scots is a Germanic language typically spoken in lowland Scotland and parts of Ulster in Northern Ireland. It has its roots in Old English, but has developed distinct features. What does that mean? It basically has some grammatical features, some vocabulary, and some lexical features as well that differentiate it from English. Realistically, it is a form of English. Okay, we use a lot of English words when we speak Scots, but we also fuse a lot of old traditional Gaelic words with it as well. But it is recognised as a language. Sometimes it's called Scots English. The traditional language, Gaelic, or Scottish Gaelic, is a Celtic language and a member of the Goidelic branch of the Celtic language family. It has a much smaller number of speakers compared to Scots and English. The Gaelic language is, while you will see it everywhere in Scotland, not many people speak it. Maybe in the north and in the Scottish Islands, it's more common. And of course, English, the dominant language in Scotland. Okay. There are regional variations, of course, and accents that distinguish Scottish English from other forms of English. The Scottish accent, I am aware, can be very difficult for foreigners to understand. Yeah. Let's talk about the music. I'm sure you've seen this before as well. This instrument, whether we love it or hate it, it's called the bagpipes. Okay, bagpipes. They are one of the most iconic symbols of Scottish music. When you hear the term Scottish music, this is probably the instrument you will think of. They are often associated with military and ceremonial events. Okay, quite commonly seen at funerals as well, and sometimes weddings too. Other instruments, which are considered part of traditional Scottish music. We have the fiddle, which is just down here. Okay, it's like a small violin. And of course, the accordion. Okay, they are very common in what we call céilí dances. This word here is céilí. I'll be surprised if anyone knows what this word means. So it's an old Gaelic word, this one. It basically, it's quite difficult to translate this word, but it basically means a social gathering, rassemblement, or like a party or something, okay? The way we know céilís today in Scotland, it's usually with traditional music and Scottish dance and traditional Scottish dress, as we can see over here, these gentlemen are wearing, okay? Now, just to be clear, we don't call this a skirt, okay? It's not a skirt, we call it a kilt, okay? Kilt. What can I tell you here? So céilí bands, so these bands typically consist of people playing the fiddle, accordions, guitars, and other traditional instruments as well. You don't tend to see bagpipes at céilís. The music is usually more lively and designed for dancing, whereas bagpipe music, it's usually more for military type services. It can sometimes sound sad as well for funerals. Scottish traditions. Okay, we have many of them, many. This is probably one of the most internationally recognized things from Scottish traditions. We have what's called the Highland Games. Now, what are they? They are a traditional Scottish event that takes place every year in Scotland. And they started almost 1,000 years ago, okay, in the 11th century. These games typically include a variety of competitions, and they showcase strength, skill, and endurance. I'm going to show you a couple of notable events. You might be surprised with these. The first one here is what we call caber tossing. Looks like something you might see in Game of Thrones or Outlander or something, right? So, as we can see in the picture, what happens is a very strong man, usually, will carry a large piece of wood, a large log, and they'll try and throw it as straight as they can. And yes, they do traditionally wear kilts during the Highland Games as well. Now, this is a game that is very, very popular in Scotland. I remember playing this game at school when I was a child, tug of war. As we can see here, you have people on either side of a rope, and they are pulling the rope. Whoever manages to pull the rope to their side wins. There can be many people pulling the rope. Sometimes it can be just one, sometimes it can be a group of 5 or more. And no, I did not wear a kilt at primary school playing this game, just to be clear. We also have various dancing contests as well. Okay, now the dancing that we do in Scotland, it's not, you don't have to be a skilled dancer by any means. So you just have to enjoy the music and just move. We have various traditional dances. One of the most famous is called the Gay Gordons as well. Okay, and it's usually with a partner. It's kind of like a ballroom dance, but not as, it's difficult to explain, but it's not as skilled, so to speak. Okay. Now, for anybody who is interested in learning more about the costumes and the traditions of Scotland, we have an article on the Le Cercle de l'Homme blog. Okay. It's in French, but yeah, you can check it out. You'll see some words that were maybe used in today's conference as well, particularly with Kaylee and things like that. Okay. And this, of course, is the current flag of Scotland. This is the national flag of Scotland today. I showed you the old flag earlier with the yellow and the kind of dragon type creature in the middle. But here today, we have the blue saltire, as we call it. It is this shape because our patron saint is St. Andrew, and he was crucified diagonally, like this, okay? He did not want to be crucified the traditional way because he did not feel as worthy as Jesus Christ. That's how the story goes. So that's why he's crucified diagonally, and that's why we have that shape on our flag. Okay. So I will take some questions right now. Hopefully some people have some questions about Scotland, anything they want to ask. You can type in the chat box. You can turn off your microphone if you want and directly ask me. Anybody? Do people learn all the official languages at school? That's a very good question. Thank you for that. So Scots English and English is kind of, they're so similar to one another. They really are. The only difference is with Scots English, there are some minor grammatical differences, and quite often in Scots English, we use a lot of old Gaelic words that are not used in other English-speaking countries. When it comes to Gaelic, Gaelic has started to be introduced in schools a lot more. I did do Gaelic lessons while I was at school, in primary school. I did it for, I want to say 2 years in total, but I've never really used it, to be honest. Most people in Scotland just speak English or some degree of English, Scots English, so to speak. Okay, and with the official sign language, I should point that out as well. It depends. Depends on the school. It's not universally taught everywhere, but in some schools for sure. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions there at all, or? You're very welcome. I'm seeing some comments come in now. You're very welcome, Sandrine, Priscilla, you too. John Celine. Okay, are British people considered like brothers, or? It's a very good question. Yes, to sum up. Are there some differences culturally with Scotland and England, for example? Yes, of course. There are some differences. But no, we are neighbours. We're all part of the one country. We do have disagreements quite often with politics and the law and other things. But yes, we consider each other like brothers, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, everyone, if that's all, thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for attending today. I will be hosting another conference next week at the same time. You're very welcome, Christine. Thank you for the comment there. And yeah, hopefully I'll get to see everyone again soon. The video will be available very shortly via our website. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Hopefully I'll see you again soon. Okay. Bye-bye.